Pemdas, a review. You should know Pemdas already. Stands for parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. In some other countries you might see it referred to as BODMAS, standing for brackets, orders, division, multiplication, addition, and subtraction. We learn about PEMDAS, so why do we even care about BODMAS? Well, the reason I have this slide here is to show you some of the similarities as well as a key difference between the two. Now, first of all, brackets, parentheses, pretty much the same thing. Orders, it says roots and powers. Well, that's because if you have a non-integer exponent, that is actually a root. Like if you have something to the 1/2 power, that is a square root. So then you'll see division, multiplication, addition, and subtraction, but note the difference between PEMDAS and BODMAS. They don't call it BOMDAS because they switch around division and multiplication. So what does this imply? What this means is PEMDAS could actually be PEDMAS. So to understand why, we need to look at fractions. Now this is a generic fraction of numerator over denominator, and every number can be expressed as a fraction, even irrational ones. Now what I mean by that is even an irrational number such as pi can be written as pi. Now you might wonder, how is pi a fraction? And this is how. But how does it help? Well, when we're talking about fractions, there is no difference between the following: divide blank by 2, or take half of blank, or multiply blank by 0.5. So dividing 12 by 2, we get 12 divided by 2, which equals 6. Taking half of 12, we get 1/2 of 12, or 1/2 times 12, that equals 6. Multiplying 12 by 0.5 is 12 times 0.5, which equals 6. So you can see all three of those phrases mean exactly the same thing mathematically. So therefore, there is no difference in saying divide by 2 or multiply by 1/2. And so therefore, we can say that multiplication and division are basically the same operation. They're just inverses of one another. But we can simplify PEMDAS even more. And this is because addition and subtraction are also the same operation, aren't they? Because I know that at some point you probably learned subtraction is simply adding the opposite. So like 5 minus 2 is the same thing as 5 plus -2. And therefore, we can look at addition and subtraction as pretty much the same operation, right? So therefore, PEMDAS could be PEMA, or it could be PEDS. Or we could just stick with PEMDAS and just recognize that parentheses take priority over exponents, and exponents take priority over multiplication, division, and that takes precedence or priority over addition and subtraction. So always do the parentheses first, then do the exponents next. And remember, roots are also exponents. For example, the square root of 3 could be rewritten as 3 to the 1/2 power. Then we treat all multiplications and divisions as factors and go left to right. And similarly, we treat all of our additions and subtractions as sums of positives and negatives and also go left to right. So factor chains. Suppose you had to solve this big long string of fractions for x. 3/8 times 15.3 times 7 over 6.5 times 5 over 12 times 1/4 times 1.2 over 11 times 7 times 3 over 13 equals x. Well, the first thing to identify is these are all factors. If they're separated out by the multiplication, it's one long factor chain, and as such you can multiply all the numerators and you can divide all the denominators in any order thanks to the associative property of multiplication. So let's look at a couple ways that you could solve for x. You could solve it like this. You could put parentheses and group each one of these units, say the quantity of 3/8 times 15.3 times the quantity of 7 over 6.5 times the quantity of 5 over 12 times the quantity of 1 over 4 times the quantity of 1.2 over 11 times 7 times the quantity of 3 over 13. You don't need to, but you could. Now, you could remove all those unnecessary parentheses because they're all multiplied together, And therefore you would get 3 over 8 times 15 times 7 over 6.5 times 5. Actually, when I'm saying over, I should say slash here. But you get the idea. Or you could simply multiply all of the numerators and divide all of the denominators, and this is my preferred method. And you could get 3 times 15.3 times 7 times 5 times 1.2 times 7 times 3 divided by 8 divided by 6.5 divided by 12 divided by 4 divided by 11 divided by 13. And you will see that I left off that 1 that was over the 4, and this is because whenever you multiply or divide by 1, it doesn't change anything, so I just left it off. So we will do a PEMDAS example now. Solve for n, where n equals the quantity of 8 plus 3 times 2 minus 3 times 4, that quantity to the third power. All of that divided by the quantity of 3 plus 1 divided by the quantity of 16 over 4 minus the square root of 4. Okay, awesome. Step 1, parentheses. Within the parentheses there are other operations. Well, remember, still follow PEMDAS within those units. So looking at the parenthetical quantity in the numerator, we have the quantity of 8 plus 3 times 2 minus 3 times 4, all of that to the third power. Simplifying that, we have to do multiplication or division before we could do addition and subtraction, so we will get 8 plus 6 minus 12, and all of that to the third power. Now we can do the addition subtraction, and we will get 8 plus 6, which is 14, minus 12 equals 2. And that leaves us with 2 to the third power. Now in the denominator, obviously the quantity of 3 plus 1 equals 4. But then we have this other one here, and it says the quantity of 16 over 4 minus the square root of 4. Well, the square root of 4 is going to be the first thing we need to solve because that's an exponent, really. So we'll get 16 over 4 minus 2. The next thing we have to do is the 16 over 4 because that's a division. So we will get 16, or it's a multiplication if you look at it as 16 times 1 over 4. And you will get 4 minus 2, and that ultimately equals 2. So now we went from this to this. 2 to the third power over 4 over 2. So step 2, solve any exponents, and we have one of those there. So 2 to the third is equal to 8, and thus we get this. N equals 8 over 4 over 2. And so finally, we get n equals 8 over 4 over 2. So it's time for the multiplication and division step. So super easy, right? Except the way this guy is saying it is completely wrong. And I'm just going to show you here, because if I say it in words, it's going to be confusing. So just look at what's on here for a moment. You can pause it if you wish. So to actually solve it, you have to multiply by the reciprocal. And therefore, 8 becomes 8 over 1, and you multiply it by 2 over 4. And thus you get 16 over 4, which equals 4. So that does it for the PEMDAS video here. I will see you next time.